The road was quiet that morning, long and winding through the tall pines that hid the land from view. Ryan drove slowly, the old truck rumbling beneath him, its tires crunching against the gravel path his father had built decades ago. It had been years since he last came here. Work had taken him overseas, and the world had changed while he was gone. But his land, his father's land, was supposed to stay untouched. That land was sacred to him, fenced and private, the last untouched piece near the edge of a rapidly growing city. He had always imagined coming back to find peace, to walk through the same fields his father once called home. But as he turned around the bend, his heart froze. The gate, his family's old iron gate that had always been locked, was wide open. The heavy chains that once secured it lay broken in the dirt. Beyond it, something looked different, wrong, completely foreign. The familiar quietness of trees was gone, replaced by the sharp hum of modern life. Ryan pressed the brake, staring through the windshield in disbelief. He could see roofs. Dozens of them. He blinked hard, thinking he was mistaken. But no. He saw streets lined with identical houses, cars parked neatly, and lawns too perfect to be real. A large sign stood by the roadside, polished and professional, Oak Springs Community, managed by Karen Lewis, HOA president. His stomach twisted. "No," he whispered. "That's impossible." He stepped out of the truck, the sound of his boots against the gravel echoing like thunder in his ears. He walked through the open gate, past a new mailbox that wasn't supposed to exist, past street lamps and sidewalks that had never been here before. His land, his father's acres, had been turned into a subdivision. 36 homes, all built on what was once his open field. His field. The same ground where he learned to ride a bike, where his father taught him to build fences, where they planted trees and buried the family dog. And now strangers lived here, walking dogs of their own, smiling, waving, unaware that the ground beneath them belonged to someone else. Ryan felt anger rising inside him, cold and sharp. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the folded deed his father had given him before he died. The edges were worn, but the writing was clear. Ryan Cole, sole owner of Parcel 14, Oak County, 126 acres. He stared at it for a long time, then looked up at the endless rows of homes built on his land. Someone had done this. Someone had built an entire neighborhood without asking, without paying, without even telling him. He climbed back into his truck, his mind spinning. Who would have the power to do this? Who would dare? He drove deeper inside, moving slowly down the new asphalt road that cut through his property like a scar. The houses looked expensive, freshly painted with clean driveways and modern fences. Children played outside, laughing. A few homeowners looked up curiously as his old truck passed by. A woman watering her garden smiled and waved. Ryan forced a nod, his chest burning. They didn't know. They were innocent. The real culprit was somewhere else, someone who had allowed this to happen. When he reached the end of the road, he saw a large brick building with a sign, Oak Springs HOA office. Outside stood a woman in her 50s, dressed in a sharp suit, talking to a man with papers in his hands. Her voice was loud, confident, almost rehearsed. "We're the pride of Oak County," she was saying. 36 homes, all sold, all perfectly maintained. No exceptions, no excuses. This is how an HOA should be run. Ryan stepped out of the truck. The woman turned toward him, her expression instantly switching from professional to annoyed. "Excuse me, sir," she said. "Residents only. HOA office is private property." Ryan studied her face. "Karen Lewis?" he asked quietly. She looked startled. "Yes, that's me. Do I know you?" "You will," Ryan replied coldly. "I just wanted to ask, who gave you permission to build all this?" Karen blinked. "I'm sorry, what?" "This," Ryan said, gesturing around. "These houses. This community. This road. It's all mine. This land belonged to my father. It was never sold, never zoned for housing. So tell me, who gave you permission to build on it?" Karen let out a small laugh, the kind that hid nervousness. "Sir, you must be mistaken. This is a registered development. Everything was approved by the county. Ryan's eyes narrowed. Approved by who? She crossed her arms. By the developer, of course. A company called Oak Springs Realty. They purchased the land 6 years ago. Ryan shook his head slowly. That's impossible. You can check the records, she said, her tone defensive. I don't have time for jokes. I'm not joking, Ryan said, his voice calm but full of restrained fury. And you should make time. Because what's standing here, these homes, are built on stolen property. Karen frowned. Sir, if you're trying to start trouble, I'll have to ask you to leave. You'll want me to leave, Ryan said quietly. But I won't. She stared at him, unsure whether to laugh or call someone. Ryan turned away, climbed back into his truck, and drove off slowly. He needed answers, and he knew exactly where to get them. That night, he went to the county office, pulling old records until he found the original deed, the same one his father had filed 30 years ago. It matched his copy exactly. But something strange appeared in the digital registry, an updated transfer 6 years ago showing a sale to Oak Springs Realty. Only, the signature on it wasn't his. It wasn't even close. Someone had forged the entire document. He stared at the name, an old signature of his late father's, copied perfectly but dated years after his death. The realization hit him like a punch. Someone had stolen his land on paper before stealing it in reality. Ryan sat back in the chair, the fluorescent lights buzzing above him, his jaw tightening. Whoever did this had money, influence, and connections. But they didn't have his patience. He took photos of every page, every file, then left quietly. As he drove home, he thought about his father, the man who'd always told him to stand his ground. Son, his father had once said, never fight angry. Fight smart. Ryan's lips curved into a grim smile. I'll fight smart, Dad. When he reached the old cabin near the property edge, he parked under the trees and turned off the engine. The night was quiet again, the kind of silence that felt alive, like the land itself was waiting for something. He walked to the old fence line, where the gate had once stood strong, and ran his hand over the cold metal. They think they own this, he whispered. But they don't. From his truck, he pulled out a box filled with his father's old maps and papers. He spent hours under a dim lantern, studying every boundary line, every measurement. That's when he found something, the original survey blueprint from the county, signed and sealed. It showed something that made him freeze. The main road leading into the entire subdivision, the one all 36 homes used every day, lay entirely on his parcel. His land. His private road. His eyes widened. So they built everything, and they all have to pass through my gate. He stared at the map for a long moment, then laughed quietly, a sound full of disbelief and dark amusement. They built a neighborhood on my dirt, he murmured, and not one of them owns the road to it. That realization changed everything. He didn't need a fight. He needed a lock. The next morning, he went to the hardware store and bought new chains and a heavy industrial padlock. The cashier looked at him curiously. Big project? She asked. Ryan smiled faintly. You could say that. When he returned to the gate, he stared at the open entrance for a long time. Cars moved in and out, residents coming and going, unaware that they were driving through someone else's property. He waited until evening, when the street was quiet, and then he walked to the gate with the new chains. The metal clinked softly as he wrapped them around the posts, the padlock snapping shut with a heavy click that echoed through the trees. The gate stood closed again, like it always should have been. Ryan stood there, looking out at the lights of the neighborhood beyond the fence, his heart calm but his mind burning with focus. They don't know whose gate they've walked through, he whispered again, the same words he said the day he found it. Behind him, the wind rustled the trees, carrying his father's words in the distance. Words about respect, patience, and justice. He turned back toward his truck, knowing this was only the beginning. Someone was about to learn what happens when you build your dreams on another man's land. Ryan woke early the next morning, his mind restless, the smell of damp earth filling the cabin as he brewed his coffee. He hadn't slept much. The image of those 36 homes wouldn't leave his head. Every wall, every driveway, every mailbox was a theft covered in fresh paint. He sat at the table staring at the old deed again, the one his father had signed with steady hands decades ago, and whispered, "You protected this land your whole life. Now it's my turn." He grabbed his truck keys and drove back toward the new neighborhood, passing through the same gate he had locked the night before. The padlock hung there untouched, proof that no one yet knew he had reclaimed it. As he drove in, a few residents gave him confused looks. A man mowing his lawn stopped, waving politely. "You the contractor?" he asked. Ryan smiled faintly. "Something like that." He parked by the HOA office, noticing Karen's silver SUV outside. The morning sun glinted off its polished surface like arrogance made metal. Inside, the office buzzed with quiet chatter. Karen stood behind the counter, wearing her usual tailored jacket and a name badge that said President, Oak Springs HOA. She was holding a clipboard, giving orders to two assistants about landscaping rules and parking violations. Ryan waited until she noticed him. "You again?" she said sharply. "I thought we made ourselves clear yesterday." Ryan walked up slowly, calm but firm. "You said this land was bought from the county 6 years ago." She nodded, trying to sound confident. "Yes, that's correct. Everything here was legally approved." "By who?" he asked. Karen hesitated just a moment too long. "Oak Springs Realty. They were the original developers. They handled all the paperwork. I just manage the community now." Ryan leaned slightly closer, his voice low. "You sure about that? Because I spent last night in the county archives. There's no legal sale. No transfer. The land was never yours to build on." Karen's smile faltered. "You must have checked the wrong file." "I checked them all," Ryan said coldly. "And I found the name of the man who forged the signature. Someone named Andrew Creston. You know him?" Her eyes flickered with recognition before she looked away. "He was the developer. He's gone now. Moved out of state." "How convenient," Ryan muttered. Karen crossed her arms, her tone sharpening. "Look, Mr. Whoever you are, I don't know what game you're playing. But if you try to mess with this community, you'll have more problems than you can handle." Ryan gave a faint smile. "I don't play games, Karen. I end them." Her expression hardened. "You're trespassing. I could call the police." "Go ahead," Ryan replied. "They'll tell you whose land you're standing on." She glared at him but didn't move. Behind her, one of the assistants whispered nervously, "Is everything all right, Mrs. Lewis?" Karen nodded quickly. "It's fine. Just a misunderstanding." Ryan turned and walked out, but not before noticing a large map hanging on the office wall. It showed the layout of the subdivision, complete with numbered plots and property lines. He stopped for a moment, staring at it, his eyes narrowing as he saw something strange. Plot numbers 1 through 36 neatly aligned inside one large rectangle labeled Private Lot, Oak Springs Development. The same rectangle matched exactly the shape of his father's land in the old survey map. Ryan smiled slightly, murmuring under his breath, "They didn't even bother changing the lines." He left the office quietly and drove into the city again. This time he went to the old county records building, the one his father used to visit for land tax receipts. The clerk behind the counter, an older man named Douglas, remembered his father. "Your old man was a tough one," he said, shaking his head. "Never missed a payment, even when the taxes went up." Ryan nodded. He was proud of this land. Douglas leaned closer. "You still own it, right?" "That's what I thought," Ryan said. "But someone built a neighborhood on it." Douglas's eyes widened. "What? That's impossible." Ryan showed him the deed and the forged copy. Douglas examined them carefully and whistled. "That's a fake, all right. Whoever did this had access to old property files. This isn't just a mistake, it's a setup." Ryan's eyes darkened. "Can you print the development permit for Oak Springs Realty?" Douglas nodded, typing fast. Within minutes, a file appeared showing all construction approvals. It listed Karen Lewis as project liaison for the HOA, not just a manager. Ryan stared at the screen. She was involved from the start. Douglas sighed. Looks that way. She probably helped cover the paperwork. Ryan thanked him and left, gripping the documents tightly. He drove back toward the property, anger simmering under his calm exterior. By the time he arrived, the sun was low, casting long shadows across the stolen streets. He parked near the gate again and sat quietly for a while, watching families laugh and children play, completely unaware that they were living on stolen ground. They don't know, he said softly. But she does. Later that night, as lights went out across the community, Ryan walked the fence line, counting steps, measuring distance, marking spots on his map. He noticed something odd, a small utility shed at the back of the property, one he didn't remember. It had fresh paint and a lock on the door. He picked it open with a screwdriver and found boxes of files inside. HOA records, payment receipts, and development photos. One folder caught his eye. It was labeled Phase 1, Founders Agreement. Inside were early photos of the land before construction began. He froze when he saw one of them. In the photo, Karen was standing with two men, one of them the developer Andrew Creston, the other a county inspector he recognized from the archive. They were smiling, shaking hands under a banner that said Oak Springs Groundbreaking Ceremony. The date stamped on the photo was 5 years after his father's death. His hand clenched around the paper. She knew. She had known from the start. He took the folder, locked the shed again, and returned to his truck. As he sat behind the wheel, he could see Karen's house from a distance, the biggest one, with perfect landscaping and lights glowing softly from the windows. She lived in the middle of what wasn't hers. He started the engine but didn't drive off. Instead, he whispered, "You built your castle on my soil, Karen. Let's see how it feels when the ground starts shaking." The next morning, Karen noticed strange things. New survey markers appeared overnight along the edge of the property, bright orange stakes with numbers on them. Her morning coffee turned bitter as she saw Ryan's truck parked near the gate again. He stood beside it, calm, watching. She stormed out of her house, shouting, "What do you think you're doing?" Ryan didn't even look at her. Checking boundaries. "You have no right," she yelled. "This is HOA land." "It's my land," he said quietly. "And now I can prove it." She froze, her face pale. "You're bluffing." Ryan looked at her, eyes cold. "You built 36 homes on stolen property, Karen. I don't need to bluff. I just need to wait." Without another word, he got into his truck and drove away, leaving her standing in the street as neighbors began to peek out of their windows. Karen forced a smile and waved nervously at them, pretending everything was fine. But deep inside, panic had already started. The queen of the HOA had no idea that her empire was about to fall, and the man who owned the gate had already turned the key that would lock her world shut forever. Ryan didn't sleep that night, his mind working like a machine, every piece of the puzzle falling into place. The land, the forged papers, the fake signatures, it was all connected, and now he finally understood the scale of the deception. He stood by the window of his cabin, staring toward the faint glow of the stolen neighborhood lights in the distance. Every house there was proof of betrayal, every street a reminder that someone thought they could erase his family's name with a few signatures. But they had made one mistake. They built everything on a single road that belonged to him. The next morning, Ryan drove into town and met with a quiet, gray-haired lawyer named Davis who had handled his father's estate years ago. Davis adjusted his glasses as he examined the new papers Ryan brought. "Good Lord," he murmured, flipping through the forged documents. "This isn't just fraud. It's organized theft." Ryan nodded, his voice calm but heavy. "Can we stop them?" Davis looked up, surprised at the cold certainty in Ryan's tone. "Stop them? You can do more than that. You can take it all back." He pulled an old folder from his cabinet, Ryan's original land records. "This right here proves your ownership is still valid. The transfer was never legal. And you still control the road, legally, physically, and financially." Ryan's lips curved into a faint smile. Then I guess it's time to remind them whose road they've been driving on. Davis looked concerned. Be careful, Ryan. People like them, they won't give up quietly. Ryan stood, shaking his hand firmly. They don't have to give up quietly. They just have to give up. When Ryan returned that afternoon, the HOA was already buzzing. He could feel it the moment he passed the gate. The same gate that once welcomed strangers to what they thought was their paradise. Now, it would become their cage. Karen stood outside the HOA office talking to a few board members, her voice sharp and defensive. His bluffing. I checked with the county. There's no record of his claim. But one of the board members, a middle-aged man with a concerned look, said, Then how do you explain the survey flags? They line up perfectly with his parcel map. Karen glared at him. He probably planted them himself to scare us. Maybe, the man replied quietly, but the residents are getting nervous. We need to know if he's serious. Karen scoffed. He's nobody. Just some drifter pretending to be an owner. That's when her voice dropped as she saw Ryan's truck rolling down the street. He parked near the entrance, stepped out, and walked straight toward them with the calm of a man who had already won. Karen crossed her arms tightly. Back again? Didn't I tell you to stay off private property? Ryan stopped a few feet away. Private property? He repeated softly. That's funny. Because the last time I checked, this road, this entrance, this land, it all belongs to me. She laughed, but her voice was trembling now. You have no proof. Ryan reached into his coat and pulled out a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. This is a certified copy of the county deed. It says otherwise. She hesitated before snatching it from his hand, her eyes scanning the page. The color drained from her face when she saw the seal. This can't be real, she whispered. It's real enough, Ryan said quietly. And you should read the last line. It says this property includes the primary access road leading to parcel 14, which covers everything behind that gate. The other board members leaned closer, whispering among themselves. Karen tried to hold her composure. You think a piece of paper scares me? We'll take this to court. Ryan smiled faintly. You should. That way I can sue for damages. 36 houses at market value. Let's see if the HOA can afford that. She stared at him, realizing the trap she was in. You wouldn't, she said, her voice shaking. You'd make hundreds of families homeless. No, Ryan replied calmly. I didn't make them homeless. You did. You built their homes on stolen ground. His voice was low, steady, and cutting like steel. The silence that followed was heavy. Even the wind seemed to stop. Karen's eyes darted between him and the road behind him, as if searching for a way out that didn't exist. Finally, she threw the paper back at him and shouted, You can't just take this from us. Ryan caught it effortlessly, his expression unreadable. I'm not taking anything. I'm just reclaiming what's mine. He turned and walked back to his truck as whispers spread through the small crowd that had gathered. People recorded the moment on their phones, curious and fearful. By evening, the whole neighborhood had heard about the confrontation. Some thought Ryan was bluffing. Others began to wonder if they were living on borrowed ground. Karen stayed up late, pacing her living room, her mind racing. Every document she checked only made things worse. The property line really did start at the gate, and the HOA had no recorded right-of-way. The developer had skipped filing an easement before disappearing years ago. The entire neighborhood existed by technical trespass. The next morning, Ryan hired a professional surveyor to remeasure the boundaries. Bright red flags appeared along the road, cutting through driveways and lawns like open wounds in the perfect suburban order. Homeowners started asking questions. What's going on? Who's that man? Why's he marking our yards? Karen called an emergency meeting in her driveway, trying to maintain control. Everyone calm down, she shouted. It's just a misunderstanding. Some lunatic thinks he owns the road. The board will handle it. But even as she spoke, a black SUV pulled up. The driver, a county official named Harold, stepped out with a clipboard. Mrs. Lewis, he asked formally. We received notice of a property dispute regarding Oak Springs community. She forced a smile. Yes, but it's just a mistake. Harold nodded slowly. Maybe, but according to our initial review, this community sits on land that was never legally transferred. We'll need to verify ownership immediately. The crowd went silent. Karen's fake smile cracked, her hand tightening around the clipboard. That's not possible. Harold glanced at Ryan, who stood quietly nearby. Mr. Cole, is it? Ryan nodded. Yes, I filed the claim. Harold looked back at Karen. Then you'll need to provide documentation by next week proving your right-of-way and ownership. Until then, we advise you not to alter or sell any property here. The neighbors murmured nervously as Harold got back into his SUV and drove away. Karen turned toward Ryan, her face red with anger. You planned this. No, Ryan said simply. You did. He got into his truck and drove off again, leaving behind a neighborhood built on panic. That night, Karen couldn't sleep. Her phone buzzed nonstop with messages from angry homeowners demanding answers. You said everything was legal. Did we buy stolen property? Are we going to lose our homes? She tried replying, but her words sounded hollow even to herself. Across the street, the lights in Ryan's cabin burned late into the night. He sat at his table, looking at old photos of his father standing by the gate, the same gate that now separated truth from lies. They think I'm after revenge, he murmured to himself. But all I ever wanted was respect. He folded the deed carefully, slid it back into his folder, and looked out the window toward the silent houses beyond the trees. They built a kingdom on my road, he said softly, and tomorrow I remind them who the road belongs to. The next morning, Oak Springs didn't look peaceful anymore. It looked nervous, broken, and tense. The whispers that once floated politely between white fences had turned sharp. Homeowners peered from their porches as Ryan's truck drove past slowly. The man everyone was now talking about, but no one dared to confront directly. Some thought he was bluffing. Others already knew deep down that the calm stranger with the quiet eyes wasn't lying. Karen, however, refused to believe it. She had built her identity on control, and to admit defeat meant losing the only power she ever had. In her mind, Ryan was just a troublemaker looking for money. So instead of facing the truth, she prepared for war. That morning, she called an HOA board meeting at the clubhouse. The small room filled quickly, board members, homeowners, and curious neighbors. Karen stood at the front, her arms crossed tightly, voice loud and theatrical. He's bluffing, she declared. He's trying to scare us into paying him off. This is harassment, and we won't tolerate it. One homeowner, a middle-aged man named Frank, raised his hand. But what if he's not bluffing? The county guy said the land transfer wasn't legal. What if the whole neighborhood's on his property? Karen glared at him. Frank, don't spread fear. We're fine. I've already contacted a lawyer, and will send him a cease and desist letter by tomorrow. She smiled confidently, but her hands were shaking. Another woman stood up nervously. My husband looked up the parcel maps online, and they match what Ryan said. The gate, the road, it's all part of his property line. What if he locks us in? Karen laughed coldly. He wouldn't dare. The police won't allow it. But deep inside, she wasn't sure anymore. After the meeting, she stormed back to her office and started drafting a threatening letter, accusing Ryan of trespassing and property interference. She even added words like criminal intent and fraudulent claims, hoping the language would scare him. She printed the letter and placed it neatly in an envelope, sending one copy to his mailbox and another to the county. She felt powerful again for a moment, but it didn't last long. That evening, Ryan returned from the county courthouse with new documents in hand, official boundary confirmation maps and a notice that temporarily froze all HOA construction or improvements until ownership was settled. He walked to the gate just as the sun dipped behind the trees. Karen saw him from across the street and came running, heels clacking against the pavement. You think this is funny? She shouted. You're disrupting families. You're ruining people's lives. Ryan turned slowly, his voice calm but unshakable. I didn't ruin anything, Karen. You did. All I did was come home. She scoffed. You're bluffing. You can't stop us. You're right, Ryan said, taking a slow step closer. I can't stop you from lying. But I can stop you from using my road. She froze, her throat tightening. You wouldn't dare. Try me, he said quietly. The way he said it made her step back instinctively. His calm scared her more than anger ever could. The next day, bright yellow notices appeared near the entrance. Official legal notices stating private property. Access by owner permission only. Karen tore one down in a rage and crumpled it in her hand. You can't do this, she yelled. But Ryan wasn't even there to hear it. He was at the city legal office filing another document. A temporary restriction order giving him full control over the gate and surrounding access. When he returned, he saw neighbors standing in small groups whispering nervously. Is it true? Can he really lock us out? Karen said she's handling it. But no one looked convinced anymore. Later that evening, as the sun faded and the lights of the perfect suburban houses began to flicker on, Karen received a phone call that shattered what little confidence she had left. It was from the same county officer who had visited before, Mrs. Lewis. He said professionally, "We've completed the verification. The property known as Oak Springs Estate sits within Parcel 14, registered under the ownership of Mr. Ryan Cole. The development permit filed under Oak Springs Realty was never approved. Legally, the land belongs to him." Karen's knees went weak. "You can't be serious." "I'm afraid I am," the officer said. "You should contact your legal team immediately. This situation could escalate." Karen hung up, breathing heavily. For the first time, her world felt like it was crumbling. That night, she sat in her living room surrounded by HOA files, her mind spinning. Every decision she'd made, every dollar collected from residents, every house rule. It was all built on stolen land. Her pride had turned to poison. Meanwhile, across the road, Ryan sat on his porch, silent, watching the neighborhood lights flicker through the trees. He knew Karen was cracking. People like her never admitted defeat. They denied, delayed, and doubled down until they destroyed themselves. He took a sip of coffee, eyes focused on the dark road. Tomorrow, he murmured to himself, she'll make her final mistake. Early the next morning, the sound of cars honking woke everyone. Karen had called in a locksmith and maintenance crew, demanding they replace the old gate locks and install new HOA-branded signs reading community entrance, private access. Ryan watched calmly from his truck. He waited until they finished drilling the final bolt before stepping forward. "Morning, gentlemen," he said politely. The crew turned to him, uncertain. "I'm the property owner. Do you have authorization to be here?" The foreman frowned. "We were hired by the HOA president." Ryan handed him a paper, the property deed and county order. "This is my land. That gate belongs to me. If you touch it again, it's trespassing." The foreman's eyes widened as he read the document. He nodded quickly. "Sorry, sir. We didn't know." They packed up their tools and drove away, leaving Karen standing alone near the half-finished sign. She glared at Ryan with rage burning in her eyes. "You're making a big mistake," she hissed. "You'll regret this." Ryan smiled faintly. "The only mistake here is thinking this land ever belonged to you." She didn't reply. She turned and stormed off, her anger shaking her shoulders. The next morning, every resident woke to find the new sign gone and the old one replaced. The gate stood tall again, freshly painted black, with one simple plaque in gold that read Cole Property, Private Access. For the first time, the people of Oak Springs realized the truth. The man they ignored, the quiet stranger they dismissed, was not the intruder. He was the owner. And Karen, the woman who had ruled them for years, had just ignored her final warning to be why the next morning. Oak Springs looked like a trapped paradise, its once peaceful streets now filled with confusion and anger. Residents woke up to find the main entrance locked with heavy iron chains and a new padlock that shone in the early sunlight. The big black gate, the same one they had always driven through freely, was now sealed tight, and a new sign hung from it that read private property. No unauthorized access. Panic spread fast. Cars lined up near the exit, horns blaring as people tried to understand what was happening. Someone shouted, "Who locked the gate?" Another replied, "It's that man, Ryan. He's doing this to us." Within minutes, Karen came rushing out of her house wearing her robe, her face pale and furious. She grabbed her phone and started calling people, her voice sharp and panicked. "Unlock it now," she screamed at the HOA maintenance crew. "Cut those chains." But when the workers arrived and saw the notice posted on the gate, a legal document stamped with the county seal, they froze. One of them read aloud, "This property access is restricted under ownership of Parcel 14. Any interference constitutes trespassing under state law." They looked at Karen nervously. We can't touch this. It's legal property." Karen's voice cracked as she shouted, "I don't care. Break it open." But before they could move, a police cruiser pulled up. Officer Daniels stepped out, the same officer who had handled earlier reports, his expression firm. "Mrs. Lewis, what's going on here?" Karen pointed toward the gate, trembling with rage. "This man has trapped us inside. He's locked the only road out. This is illegal." The officer glanced at the gate, then at the documents attached to it. Ryan stood nearby, calm and collected, watching everything unfold. Daniel sighed and turned toward Karen. "Actually, this appears to be completely legal. The property records confirm Mr. Cole owns the road and the entrance. You and the HOA have been using private property without authorization." The crowd fell silent. Neighbors whispered in disbelief. "Is that true?" someone asked. Karen's face turned red as she stammered, "No, that can't be right. The developer gave us permission." The officer shook his head. "The developer never filed an easement. You're technically trespassing every time you drive in or out." Karen looked like she might collapse. "Then what are we supposed to do?" The officer looked at Ryan. "Mr. Cole, what are your intentions?" Ryan's eyes were cold but calm. "I just want what's mine. I didn't build this mess. I just came home to find strangers living on my land. They ignored every warning, every chance to talk. So I'm taking back control, legally." The officer nodded slowly. "You have the right to do that, sir." He turned back to Karen. "I suggest you contact your lawyer, Mrs. Lewis." As the police car drove away, the reality hit the neighborhood like thunder. Ryan had full control now. The gate was his, the road was his, and without his permission, no one could come or go. Some residents tried to approach him, pleading, "Please, we didn't know. We bought our homes in good faith." Ryan listened quietly. "I know you didn't. You were lied to. I'm not your enemy, but I can't ignore what's mine." Karen stepped forward, desperation twisting her face. "You can't do this. You'll destroy families." Ryan turned to her, his eyes hard. "You already did when you built their homes on stolen land." She froze, speechless. For the rest of the day, chaos reigned inside Oak Springs. Delivery trucks stopped at the gate, unable to enter. Residents argued in the streets. News vans showed up by evening, reporters shouting questions through the fence. "Mr. Cole, is it true you locked down an entire HOA community?" Ryan said little, his calm silence fueling even more curiosity. Meanwhile, Karen's phone rang nonstop, angry homeowners demanding answers, local media asking for statements, lawyers calling about lawsuits. Her perfect world had collapsed overnight. The HOA board held an emergency meeting inside her house, papers scattered across the table. Frank, the board treasurer, spoke first. "Karen, we're finished. The HOA has no legal standing. Every house sits on his land. The bank won't even back us." Karen slammed her hand on the table. "No, we fight this. I won't let him win." Frank stood up, voice rising. "You already lost, Karen. You lied to everyone. You said the land was approved, that everything was legal. Now look at us, we're the thieves." The room fell silent. Karen's eyes filled with tears, but she refused to cry in front of them. "Get out," she whispered. "All of you." They left quietly, leaving her alone in the house she thought she owned but never did. That night, the streetlights flickered as Ryan walked along the inside of the locked gate, checking every chain and bolt. His flashlight reflected off the metal, each sound of the chain a reminder that balance had finally returned. Across the street, Karen watched from her window, trembling. She picked up her phone and called the county office again, begging for help. "Please, there must be something you can do." But the answer was the same: the land belongs to him. You'll have to vacate if he chooses to enforce it. She hung up and sank to the floor, her breath coming in shaky gasps. Outside, Ryan stood quietly, looking at the houses beyond the gate. He didn't smile, didn't gloat. He simply watched, his face unreadable. "You should have listened when you had the chance," he murmured. By morning, the media had turned the story into national news. Homeowners Association built on wrong land. True owner locks community gate. Reporters surrounded the entrance, filming interviews with furious residents. One man shouted into the camera, "We paid for these houses. How can this happen?" Another added, "That man's right. If it's his land, it's his call. The HOA scammed us all." Karen avoided the cameras, her once proud name now a headline of humiliation. Ryan ignored the noise. He spent the day meeting with lawyers, finalizing documents, and preparing the eviction notices. By sunset, the plan was ready. The community had 7 days to leave or face legal removal. That evening, as he locked the gate one last time before heading home, Karen stormed toward him, her voice shaking with anger. "You won't get away with this. I'll find a way to stop you." Ryan looked at her, his tone calm but final. "You already had your way for 6 years, Karen. Now it's my turn." He turned, got into his truck, and drove away slowly, leaving her standing there under the cold orange glow of the streetlights, her empire sealed behind chains she had forged herself. The sun rose slow and heavy over Oak Springs that morning, painting the empty streets in dull gold as if even the sky felt the weight of what was about to happen. A cold silence hung over the neighborhood, the kind that made every sound echo louder than it should. The once proud lawns looked lifeless, the flags and decorations that once marked HOA perfection now fading under dust and wind. At 7 o'clock sharp, the sound of engines filled the air. County sheriff vehicles rolled up to the locked gate, their lights flashing but sirens off. Behind them came a long black truck carrying stacks of papers, legal notices, eviction documents, and orders of removal. Residents began gathering near the windows, their faces pale and worried. Karen stood outside her house in a black coat, clutching her phone tightly, trying one last time to call her lawyer. "They can't do this," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He can't do this." But the phone call ended the same way it had all week, with silence. The lawyer had stopped answering. She looked up as Ryan's old truck appeared at the top of the hill, moving slowly toward the gate like a storm cloud returning to finish what it started. He stopped near the officers, stepping out calmly with his hands in his pockets, the wind tugging at his jacket. Sheriff Daniels nodded respectfully. "Morning, Mr. Cole. Everything's in order. The eviction process begins today." Ryan nodded once, his voice quiet. "Let's get it done." The officers began posting papers on every home, walking door to door. The sound of tape being pulled and staplers clicking echoed through the quiet neighborhood. Families came outside holding their notices, some crying, some angry, some silent. One man shouted at Karen from across the street, "You said this land was safe. You said we were protected." Karen tried to respond, her voice breaking, "I didn't know. I thought it was approved." Another woman screamed, "You lied to us. You took our money." Soon the crowd turned into chaos, neighbors yelling at the woman they once trusted, calling her a fraud, a liar, a thief. Karen stepped back, shaking, her perfect reputation now turned to ash. Ryan stood near the gate, watching everything without saying a word. He didn't enjoy it, but he didn't pity them either. They weren't the ones who had stolen from him, but they had all lived on his land without question. The sheriff approached Karen, handing her the final envelope. "Mrs. Lewis," he said firmly, "this is an official eviction notice for your residence and all properties under your management. You have 7 days to vacate." Karen stared at the paper like it was fire burning in her hand. "Please," she said softly, "there must be another way. I can pay him. We can make a deal." The sheriff looked at Ryan. Ryan shook his head slowly. "You had your chance, Karen. I gave you warnings. I sent letters. You called me a liar." She wiped her tears angrily. "You don't understand. I built this community. I made this place perfect." Ryan's eyes were cold as steel. "You built a lie. And now it's falling." He turned away, leaving her trembling in the street as reporters began filming the moment. Cameras zoomed in on her face while the headline scrolled across live broadcasts. HOA built on stolen land. Legal owner evicts entire community. Karen's voice cracked as she shouted at the cameras, "He's taking everything from us." But the truth was plain in every document. They were living on what was never theirs. By noon, moving trucks began lining the road. People started packing their lives into boxes, the sound of doors slamming and voices echoing through the emptying houses. Some residents walked up to Ryan quietly to thank him for not being cruel. One elderly man said, "You're doing what's right, son. We were fooled too." Ryan nodded respectfully. "I know. You're not my fight." Across the street, Karen sat on her porch, staring at the chaos she had caused, her clipboard lying broken beside her. The same board she once used to rule over everyone now lay forgotten in the dust. Her husband finally arrived, his car pulling into the driveway. He stepped out, his face hard and cold. "You lied to me too," he said flatly. "You told me everything was legal. I could lose everything because of you." She reached for him, tears streaming down her face. "Please, I just wanted to make something beautiful." He pulled his arm away. "You destroyed it instead." Then he got back in the car and drove off, leaving her standing there alone as the moving trucks passed her one by one. By evening, half the homes were empty. The sound of crying children and slamming car trunks filled the air. Reporters stood near the gate, capturing the surreal scene of a community collapsing under its own arrogance. Ryan stood silently as Sheriff Daniels handed him the final verification papers. "It's done," the officer said. "The HOA is officially dissolved. You're the sole property owner of Oak Springs." Ryan took the papers, his expression calm, almost sad. "Thank you," he said softly. "It's time this land finally rests." He turned toward the gate, unlocking it slowly, letting the last few vehicles drive out before he closed it again. As the sun dipped behind the trees, the once perfect suburban neighborhood looked like a ghost town. Empty houses lined the street, curtains fluttering through open windows, mailboxes overflowing with eviction papers. Karen stood in front of her house until the streetlights flickered on, her face pale in the glow. She whispered to herself, "This can't be real. I built this." But it was real. Every lie she told had been buried under the foundation of those homes, and now the truth had risen to tear them all down. Ryan walked past her slowly, his boots crunching on the gravel. "You should leave, Karen," he said quietly. "This place was never yours." She looked up at him, eyes full of hatred and sorrow. "You think you won, don't you?" He shook his head. "Winning was never the goal. I just wanted my father's land back." He walked away, leaving her in the silence she had created. That night, the gate stood locked once more, the metal shining faintly under the moonlight. Beyond it, Oak Springs lay in ruin, a monument to greed, pride, and arrogance. And for the first time in 6 long years, the land was quiet again, as if finally free from the lies that had covered it. Weeks passed after the eviction, and Oak Springs had turned from a proud neighborhood into a silent memory. The once spotless lawns had grown wild, the fancy mailboxes hung open and rusting, and the echo of laughter that once filled the streets was replaced by the whisper of wind moving through empty driveways. Ryan drove slowly past the abandoned homes, his truck tires crunching against the gravel road that was now truly his. Every house he passed was a reminder of the lies that had once stood taller than truth. He didn't feel joy or revenge, just quiet justice. The land, his father's land, finally breathed again, free from the chains of arrogance that had smothered it. As he stopped near the old gate, he stepped out and walked toward the same spot where his father had once stood, watching over the property that meant everything to their family. He placed his hand on the cold metal, whispering softly, "It's yours again, Dad." Behind him, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and the shadows of the empty homes stretched long and thin across the ground like ghosts of greed fading into dust. But the silence didn't last long. A small car approached from the distance, its tires kicking up dirt as it stopped near the gate. Karen stepped out slowly, wearing simple clothes instead of her usual expensive suits. She looked smaller now, weaker, her confidence long gone. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Ryan," she said softly, "I didn't think you'd still be here." He turned to her, his expression calm but guarded. "I never left," he said. "This is my home." She nodded, eyes filling with tears. "I came to see it one last time, what's left of it." Ryan studied her for a moment. The woman who once ruled over others like a queen now looked broken, stripped of everything except regret. "You built an empire on stolen ground," he said quietly. "And it cost you everything." She nodded again, wiping her eyes. "I thought I was doing something good. I thought I was making a place people could be proud of." Ryan shook his head slowly. "You were building it for yourself, not for them. And when people like you forget who owns the ground beneath their feet, they always fall." She looked around at the empty homes, the faded HOA banners still fluttering on lampposts. "I destroyed it all," she whispered. Ryan's voice softened, but it still carried weight. "No, you just exposed what was already rotten. You wanted control. The land wanted peace. And peace always wins in the end." She looked at him, her face full of guilt. "You could have ruined me completely, sued me, had me arrested, taken everything. But you didn't. Why?" Ryan looked toward the horizon, his eyes steady. "Because revenge doesn't fix anything. My father didn't raise me to destroy, he raised me to protect. You took that from him. I just took it back." Karen lowered her head, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. Ryan studied her for a long moment, then replied simply, "You should be sorry to them, the families who trusted you. Not to me." She nodded weakly. "I know. I've already sold everything I had to pay back what I could. I just wanted to say thank you for not making it worse." He didn't answer. He just watched her walk toward her car, moving slowly like a person carrying too many regrets. As she reached for the door, she stopped and turned one last time. "What will you do with it now?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. Ryan looked around at the land, the trees, the open fields, the silence that stretched for miles. "I'll make something good out of it," he said. "Something honest. My father always wanted this place to help people. So that's what it'll be." She gave a small nod and got into her car. The engine started, then faded into the distance, leaving nothing but the soft rustle of wind and the creak of the gate. Ryan watched her go until her car disappeared behind the hill. Then he walked back to the gate, pulled out a new brass key, and slid it into the heavy lock. The metal clicked shut, echoing across the land like the final chapter closing. He stood there for a long time, looking through the bars at the empty road beyond. For the first time in years, he felt peace, not victory, not anger, just quiet peace. In the weeks that followed, workers came to clean up the remains of the old neighborhood. The cracked sidewalks were torn down, the sign reading Oak Springs HOA was removed, and in its place, a new sign went up. It read Freedom Ridge, Veterans Retreat. Ryan worked with local builders to create something different, something that gave back. The houses that once belonged to greed now became shelters for veterans who had nowhere else to go. The same roads that had been built on lies now led to something real. One evening, as the new residents settled in, the sound of laughter returned to the land. Not forced, not fake, but real. Ryan stood near the gate watching them, a faint smile on his face. An old man beside him, one of the first veterans to move in, asked, "You the owner here?" Ryan nodded. "Just the caretaker," he said softly. "This land takes care of itself now." The man chuckled. "Well, it's a fine place. Feels peaceful." Ryan nodded again. "It finally is." As the sun went down and the night breeze carried the smell of pine through the air, Ryan reached for the gate one last time and locked it gently. The metal made a deep sound that rolled across the quiet hills, not as a warning anymore, but as a promise that no one would ever steal this land again. And as he turned away, the moonlight fell over the golden sign that gleamed like justice written in steel. Freedom Ridge, respect earned, not taken.